It's great to have a great technical idea, but you need to make sure that you have investors that are patient and willing to give you the runway to make the market ready. And I think that is that was a really big lesson for me.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Product Stories. I'm so excited about our conversation today with Corre. We're going to be talking about product management specifically in non-commercial teams, and how to think about your career, both if you are looking to get into leadership positions, as well as how do you think about hiring product managers. So we're going to be covering a lot today. Corre, I love to get started by asking my favorite question, because everyone's career path into product management is so different. So why don't you begin and let us know, how did you get into product management?
Sure. So straight out of college, I moved into development, and I did that for about 7 years. And I was developing products, unbeknownst to the way I thought about them then, but I was developing financial instruments. So I was working for a large financial institution, Kemper Financial Services, and I was creating software to support their insurance products and their annuity products. After doing that for a number of years, I did a stint at a large global systems integrator. And the work there was very interesting. I did large implementations for ERP solutions. That's the best way to put it. I spent some time at NASA. I spent some time at DuPont. And I got really intrigued with, how do software companies come up with software that's so highly configurable that it can be used anywhere, really? And so I started becoming very interested in product management, not the development side of it anymore, specifically being a developer. Those days were over for me, but doing the product management. And I got an opportunity while I was at this systems integrator to consult for a company, which will date me a little bit, but it was AOL. And I spent 18 months there as a product manager for their international business systems. And I was hooked. That was it for me.
No going back to development, not then.
No. And so after that engagement, I went to my operations team and I said, how do I continue down this path but stay at this company? And I thought there must be an opportunity. It's such a big company, 140,000 people worldwide. And so I moved to a different division, and I got my first product management role, and it was actually as a group product manager. And the group of products was what we called our collaborative technology solutions. So it was everything to help companies and help employees collaborate more. And it included things like unified communications, video conferencing, what we consider easy or mundane and everyday kinds of products now, wikis, blogs, social networking. And yeah, that was it. I was hooked. It was great.
Yeah, it's funny how much we rely on these kinds of systems today that we kind of forget that there was a time when they were not ubiquitous, that people like you had to think about, how do we create these products whole cloth. So very interesting. And then were there any learnings when you were earlier in your career as a product manager that really helped you set you up for success into your future leadership roles?
Yeah, actually, that portfolio that I was just talking about, the technology was sound and the solutions were completely sound. And we were building managed services around those technologies and solutions with our technology partners like Microsoft and Google and I think even IBM back then. But what we found was that we were a little bit ahead of the market's willingness and readiness to spend money on this. I think that the companies weren't really ready to invest in the infrastructure that was needed to roll these kinds of solutions out to their entire, global populations. And so one of the things I learned was, it's great to have a great technical idea, but you need to make sure that you have investors, whether they're, internal investors or external investors. You have to have investors that are patient and willing to give you the runway, right, to make the market ready. And I think that is that was a really big lesson for me.
So it's almost like even with external investors who should really believe in what you are doing, you still need to bring them the business case over and over again. Is that what you're
Absolutely,
saying?
absolutely. Bring them the business case and also remind them. I think people often want a very immediate payback. And some investments, you're not going to get that payback in 12 months. And so you have to find those investors that are in it that believe in the vision and not just the financials of it.
Yeah, I feel like we talk about this all the time. It's always a conflict with product management. Product managers and oftentimes the CEO is in the space of thinking, where's the company going 5, 6, multiple years down the line?
Mhm.
Whereas a lot of our stakeholders are in the here and now. They're
Yes.
worried about this quarter. What are we
Yep.
showing for our commissions for salespeople? What are we showing for profits? And so, how do we engage those stakeholders to bring them along on the journey for the future? I think that's
That's
probably the topic. Yeah.
yes, it is. It is, and it is mastery, right? To do that, right, you have to be able to evangelize your product, your solution, but you have to be able to back it up with data. And some of that data has to come from your stakeholders themselves, right? Sales forecasts, their conversations with customers or even just prospects, but also you have to look to the market and the analyst community and see where things are going. And I think you just have to have a good way of representing the journey, right? And so people understand it's not a leap of faith, but it is a journey. And I think that's something that's really important for product managers to be able to convey.
Yeah, I think, and we were talking about this earlier around the idea of commercial teams. They can point to revenue. They're often expected to have some understanding of financial acumen, whereas within non-commercial teams, we hear it a lot where we're being told. I mean, we're being asked, I suppose, that let's not talk about pricing. Let's not talk about valuation.
Mhm,
What do you
mhm.
think when you hear a non-commercial team, whether or not they need like business and financial acumen as a core skill set?
They absolutely do, because whether you're investing external money or internal money, you have to make a business case. You have to show what is the return on that investment. And that return might not be directly attributable revenue, but it might be cost savings in some processes. It might be process efficiency. And some of those process efficiencies indirectly impact deal closure rates. They indirectly impact the ability to stand up an office or an infrastructure in another geography, which then indirectly impacts being able to sell in that geography. So you absolutely have to understand the business case, right? The investment, not just from a software and infrastructure perspective, but from a people perspective and the change management perspective. What is that investment? And then what is the expectation? What is the result? What is the business impact that you're going to contribute to the organization? And then you have to measure it so that you can demonstrate, right, the attainment of that. And if you're not attaining it, you should be looking for, okay, what did we not accomplish with this? What did we not follow through on, right? And continue to innovate on that product, that non-commercial product, until you get to those metrics that you were targeting.
Yeah, I think, and I'd be curious to hear because you were in a very, very unique position that I think a lot of our listeners at one point or other may be in, which is you're actually creating a product culture in an organization that didn't have one.
Yeah.
Right. So, in your experience, you were going through what we call project to product transformation.
Hmm.
And I think in order to get people along on that journey, it requires, again, a lot of change management and a lot of putting putting the benefit of this transition in financial terms. So, what's
Absolutely.
in it for them? So
Absolutely.
maybe you can share a little bit about that story around making the shift and some of the challenges and obstacles doing so.
Absolutely. So typically, when you're in a project world, your concerns are scope. Is it within scope? Did you deliver within budget? And did you deliver on time? Those are how projects are managed or are measured, right? But products again are measured on what is the impact, what's the value, and what's the outcome that was delivered. And so making that shift was really interesting because while I think we brought a lot of people along pretty quickly, understanding that the outcome or the value or the impact, the business benefit was important, and you needed to identify what your targets were at the beginning of your effort, and you need to try draw or measure a baseline, right? Create a baseline so that you know where you're moving from and what you're moving to. And I think we brought a lot of people along really quickly on that notion. But moving them off of was it on budget? Was it on time? And was it within scope? That's a struggle. And there is a lot of change management that has to come along because the notion of a project, right? There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. With a product, it is in existence for the duration of the value of the product, and it's usually years, right? In our world, in the software world. So the change management is really, really, really important, and it takes time, right? And it takes repetition. And I think you have to start with your product teams, but you also have to start with your stakeholders, because the stakeholders were some of the ones that were the hardest to move from that. Well, what's the date you're going to deliver this? And we want to define the scope of what you're going to deliver on day 0 so that we know on day 180 that you deliver. And that's typically not the way product teams work, right? We do incremental value over time. So that change management is important. I don't think there's a silver bullet. I wouldn't say this is the one perfect way that you have to do it, but I think that the best thing to do is talk a lot, right? Use these targets and the baselines as a way to bring alignment, right? And then keep the stakeholders informed throughout the process so that they don't feel like, again, they often did feel in the project world of, okay, we've defined everything. It's, again, day 0, and we'll see you in 6 months with your happy project delivered. So I really think it's about communication. It's about using these targets and these measures as a way to align. If you can align on those targets in the beginning, I think you will have some um, very invested stakeholders, right?
That's right. You mentioned change management, and I think with any large effort, and this one is certainly one of the largest because often you're changing people's job descriptions, like what is expected of them. You're changing how you're working together, expectations, all of this. You're changing people. And within change management efforts, usually you need to start with some kind of understanding of your stakeholders through a stakeholder mapping exercise where you're trying
Mhm.
to not just get together who is involved, but who are my champions and
Yeah.
who are my detractors. So did you have that experience? Can you share anything about some of like what I would call detractors in your way? How did you get them on board in the end, or were there people that you had to kind of pull over kicking and screaming?
Yeah, there were some folks that it took a lot more effort to bring about, to bring them over to the product way of thinking. But I think it was through that diligent, if you would, over communication on this is why we're doing what we're doing, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. Um, and then them seeing the results that actually kind of changed their mind about things. I'm thinking about one person in particular, and she and I had she was a peer of mine, and we have a fantastic relationship. but it took a while. And it actually took a couple dinners, just the two of us, without the noise of the teams, and for me to really, I think, explain in a way where she felt like there wasn't an audience, right? And she wasn't being, her questions would be received in a non-threatening way, right? And so I just think it's persistence and communication. And again, no silver bullet. It's really understanding different people's communication styles. So I'm a real fan of either DISC or there's a number of other personality and communication style kind of tests out there, and really understanding the way people communicate and how they process information, and then using their kind of traits to help them see what they haven't been able to see yet. And this person in particular was very, very analytical. So I think that you just have to keep going back, right? Keep going back and having the conversation.
I love that you're bringing up the psychology behind these conversations as well. One of my biggest surprises as a leader was finding out that people behave differently in group settings versus one-on-one settings, and so understanding that, because I would sometimes be in a situation where in a group setting I hear everyone agreeing, right? Because there's a social desire to be part of a group and be positive and
Mhm.
not be a negative person and disagree with whatever the group is talking about. And then in one-on-one, I would find out like a 180 to completely different perspective. And so that's so important, not just having a communication plan for your stakeholders, but having a variety of ways in your communicating so that you're able to get most of the information out.
Yeah,
It's brilliant.
yeah.
One of the other things that I love that you said, because, and the reason why I said with regards to going from a project to a product type culture and mindset, I find that it's not just non-commercial teams. I think a lot of commercial teams also behave in a very project orientation,
Mhm.
because they end up getting essentially a wish list of what other departments want them to work on, and then they end up behave almost like project managers
Yep.
getting their feature list out the door. And so can you talk a little bit about it's a different mentality when
Mhm.
you are trying to prioritize based on some kind of business outcome and objective you're trying to achieve
Mhm.
versus getting through a list of items on time and on budget within scope.
In fact, when I first started in product management, it was much more waterfall, much more project-like. I think that the notion of dedicated product teams has really changed the way people think about products as well. Dial back, however many years, 20 years ago, um, when products were delivered more as projects, there was this distinct divide between the development folks and then the support folks, whether they were support or operations or whatever you want to call them. And that divide really caused so much friction because the development team would do things in the most elegant way for the development team, but that might not have been the most elegant way for the support team. So, so moving from project to product, I think is is important because it makes you think about the whole product, not just the piece of software or the piece of hardware or the service itself. You have to think about the product, the whole product, as in how does somebody learn about the product? How do they first engage with the product? How do they then acquire the product? How does it then support it? And how do we then kind of upsell or resell or whatever the case? So the project teams that are or product teams that are still working in a project methodology, if you will, they are pressured, right? And I don't think this is because this is the way they want to work. I think it's stakeholder
Mhm.
pressure, but they're
Mhm.
pressured to deliver specific features because either a set of salespeople say that that's the set of features that are needed, or the CEO has promised a set of features, but they're not using their own investigative discovery methods to determine what are the problems that need to be solved. And I think that for those product teams that are still working in a project way, probably the first step to try and get out of that, or to try to start to change that, is to implement their own discovery method, because then they have data to back up their conversations with those other stakeholders, whether it's sales or customer success or whomever, to say, well, I appreciate and I understand that that's what you're hearing from those customers, but based on the discovery that I've been doing, and let me share with you the methods I've been using. Here's some of the points that we see are really important. And then having a conversation about that. I mean, I think any product team should be devoting a certain percentage of their product efforts, whether you're using Agile, whatever methodologies that you're using, but a certain percentage of your engineering development efforts to innovation, another percentage to kind of the security and the stability of the platform. And then a third tranche of that development should go to, some of the features that are being requested, but by the biggest customers or by the most customers. And I think there has to be some science in that.
Mm-hmm. And so based on what we're talking about right now, what would you say are some of the critical skills a product manager should have to do this role very well?
Yeah. So communication skills, absolutely. Because when I think of a product manager, they're often at the center of a lot of different conversations, whether you're talking to the FP&A team, right, about the performance of your product, or you're talking to the sales team about how they position your product, or the marketing team about what's the value of the product that we should be communicating to the market, legal team about how to contract. I mean, it just goes on and on. So I think communication, number one, product managers need to know how to have conversations with all of those different stakeholders and be good at it and be persuasive, right? So I think that's number one. I think leadership is really important, but not leadership in a management perspective or management way. Leadership from being able to lead and influence in a matrixed environment. Because as product managers, you're never going to be directly responsible for managing a particular set of people or development team, but you have to be able to influence. So I think leadership is really critical. Earlier, you talked about understanding business cases and understanding value and ROI. And so I think financial acumen is critical, right? If a product manager can't demonstrate what they know the investment will be for the work to develop the product, as well as the payback on that product, and again, whether that's external revenue or whether it's influencing revenue indirectly through process efficiencies or anything like that, I think they have to be able to demonstrate that. And then I think a skill, another thing that is really important for product managers, although I'm not sure I would call it a skill, I'd call it more of a kind of a personality trait, is curiosity. And I think that's also super obvious. I mean, I think you have to be curious about technology, curious about people, curious about the world at large, curious about how your software or whatever product impacts the market. So I think that's really important.
I mean, it goes back to what you were saying just now about the first step is to install a discovery process. How can you do discovery if you're not a naturally curious person?
Exactly.
Right? So,
yep.
I love that. Do you have any advice for product leaders in terms of how to hire for these traits that are so important?
One of the things I think that I look for is I certainly look for experience. Absolutely. If a candidate has great experience in particular areas or domains that are either specifically relevant to the product that I'm hiring for or tangential, that's great. But I also look for, and I would call that, skills. I also look for will. And sometimes I think will is almost more important than skill. Because if the person has the will and the drive, the tenacity, the persistence, the curiosity, oftentimes they'll easily pick up what they don't already have as a skill.
I can't agree with you more on that. And I think it's broader than just product management. It's motivated players across any department. We love hand raisers and people who are very resourceful, kind of like what you were saying. This was a great conversation. Do you have a piece of advice that you would share with people early in their career or just starting out?
Yes, I think that when you're just starting out, explore. There's so many different kinds of products, and I'm going to use air quotes, right? Because I think often in our field, people equate products to software or specifically SaaS. And it's so much broader than that, right? Products, and this is a conversation that I've had with some people, and it's hard for some people to wrap their head around, but if you're in the industry, products are anything that delivers value. So a product can be a service. It can be a managed service. It can be a consulting service. It can be a professional service. It can be hardware. It can be software. It can be anything. I mean, this discipline of product management started in the consumer product goods market, right? Decades and decades ago, right? So they've had product managers at Coca-Cola, I don't know, since the 50s probably, or the 60s. So I think that product management often gets synonymized with SaaS. And I think absolutely that's because of the evolution of our software industry. But there's a huge opportunity out there for product management across many different kinds of quote unquote products.
I love that. So stay curious and explore because the world is big and wide and there's just so much opportunity out there.
Yeah.
I love this. Okay, so wonderful message. How do all of the explorers and adventurers of the world find you?
Well, I think the best way, go to LinkedIn, my name, check out my name in the notes here because it's not spelled like you would expect, but it's Corre Curtice, right? Check me out on LinkedIn or message me at corre.curtice@gmail.com. And I look forward to our conversations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Corre.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Rena.
Follow us at our website at 280group.com and be sure to join us next week for our next episode of Product Stories.